I never should have trusted him. I never should have taken that tab. Everything around me started to change, and I knew I wasn't safe with the person that I was with. He didn't only give me a megadose, he stalked me and had something much more sinister planned. If he was willing to do that to his own father, what was he willing to do to me? When I was looking at him, I swear he transformed into what I could only explain as a malevolent... Warning. This story is loosely based on true events. These events are very disturbing and not for the faint-hearted. You told me to stop sugarcoating stories. You told me that you like the stories darker. Well, guess what? So do I. But I'll be quick. If you're ready to suspend your disbelief and become fully immersed in today's adventure, you found your new favorite channel. We post once a week, but there's plenty on the channel to binge. So if you're ready, like the video for good luck, because you're gonna need it. And make sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload. Enjoy the show. For you to understand this story, you have to understand what was going on during this particular time in my life. I also please ask the audience to not judge me for this time in my life and the decisions that I made during this time. I'm choosing to share this because I hope that you all know me for who I became over time. And I can proudly say that I'm over 6 years completely drug and alcohol free. And I deeply encourage anybody who's struggling to also embrace sobriety, and I promise that you're not alone. So let's get into the real story. When I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school, I decided to start traveling the West Coast for a little bit. 3 years and a torn labrum in my hip later, I found myself with $0 to my name back at my parents' house. Fresh out of surgery, feeling like I just got into a car accident, feeling like a shell of myself. You see, I don't regret going on that adventure, completely broke, 4,000 miles from anybody that I knew. And I truly believe that all of the stories that I gathered during that time made up for all of the hardship that I endured. Like I said, I definitely don't regret it, but in hindsight, as a real adult, I realized how reckless it was. But it was truly a reckless time in my life. If you think I'm wacky and adventurous now, I promise you would not be able to handle me from 18 to 21. At that point in my life, nobody could tell me a damn thing. I was positive I was invincible. I had never questioned my mortality before because I had never had to. Like, I could go cliff jumping in the morning, skydiving in the afternoon, go full live sparring in the evening off of a couple Cliff Bars and a black coffee. And I had never experienced a responsibility that was big and important enough to slow me down. But in an instant, my life completely changed and my impenetrable youth gave way. On a normal day of training, just like hundreds of sessions that I had done before, my hip just gave out. I tore my labrum clean off my hip socket. The ball at the top of my femur was grinding my hip socket bone on bone, and it was turning my cartilage into mush like one of those stone bowls you create guacamole in. And overnight, I was no longer a wild kid free of life's harsh realities, and I was no longer in the position in my life that my peers were initially envious of. You see, it all started with me going against the grain, not going to college, not getting a strict job, and just going and traveling all over California, to being a 21-year-old fresh out of surgery with $0 and living back in my parents' house with nothing to show for the last few years. The only thing I had was a boatload of medical bills and a couple cool stories. I was an absolute shell of myself during that time, and I know a lot of you can relate to that because it happens after major life events. It feels as if you put off maturing as long as possible, and then it all hits you at once. Every sentence you said, every decision you made, every outfit you put on, all of a sudden becomes cringeworthy and childish, and you momentarily lose that self-confidence, that carefree self-confidence you used to carry into every room. That's how I felt during that time, and that's why I was so susceptible to being dragged into what I was dragged into. I should have known it was a horrible idea from the jump, but I was blinded at the time. You see, once I was able to walk without crutches and a brace, I wanted to get back to being myself as fast as I could. I just came out of an insane, high-paced 3 years, and I didn't want the adventures to end. I wanted to get back on the horse as soon as possible. So I'm just sitting at my parents' house in my childhood bedroom texting my old high school buddies. I hadn't even let anybody know that I was back home because I didn't want to see me bedridden or post-surgery. I was embarrassed. I was so embarrassed that I was broken. I was embarrassed that I wasn't who I thought I was. And I hid from the world until I could walk again. And then once I could walk, once I didn't have to wear the brace, I felt like I had to prove to the world that I wasn't broken anymore. I needed to do something reckless and wild to show myself that I still had it. All it would take me was one thing that made me feel like myself again, and then I would be back to normal. My immature brain wanted immediate gratification, for life to go back to exactly what it was, but that's not how real life works. That's one of those harsh realities. So I started texting all my friends, letting them know that I was back in town, that I wanted to get together and I wanted to do something. It was literally the exact day that I no longer needed my hip brace, and I was hitting up people that I hadn't talked to in 3 years. And I was trying to see what plans they had that night and what we could get into, like I could just insert myself back into their life whenever I want. And I was hit with another harsh reality that day. It was a Tuesday night, and everybody that I was hitting up either had work or school the next day. The day of the week didn't mean anything to me for so long that I didn't realize how inappropriate and out of touch I was coming off. They must have thought I was absolutely nuts, borderline manic, with how I just hit them up out of the blue as if like, yo, let's go out tonight. Like, hey, haven't seen you in 3 years, wanna drop all of your responsibilities and go do something reckless with me to stroke my damaged ego? And I cringe thinking about this guy, so please give me some grace in the comments. And every person I called answered or responded to the text in the exact same manner. Like, yeah, dude, I mean, I'd love to see you, but it's gotta be like on the weekend or the weekend after next. And I'll let you know when I have some free time. Like, why are you hitting me up out of the blue? Like, hang out with me ASAP. You see, all the people that I knew and grew up with had grown up. They had jobs and careers or were deep into college and taking it very seriously. And they had adult-like boundaries. And I remember in that moment feeling so meaningless. I felt so far behind all of my peers. And I remember sitting in my room looking at my phone, realizing that I didn't need to be anywhere for anything. I don't have any opportunities on the horizon. I'm nobody's priority. I'm home around all of my friends and family, but I might as well be in the middle of nowhere with how little that I'm wanted. And I can't blame them. I realized that. I moved, I left, I removed myself from their routine for years, and they absolutely did not owe me their attention. It wasn't a cruel outcasting from my people. It was the harsh reality that people move on. The world doesn't wait for you to come back. You don't get people's time on one day's notice. This isn't high school. People have boundaries and responsibilities. And I didn't take this personally on an individual relationship level with my friends and family. I mean that, like, the boundaries made sense, but I still felt the sting of realizing that I was alone and I was hitting absolute rock bottom until my phone rang. And one of my buddies that had missed my call when I called him initially was calling me back, and I was assuming that he was going to tell me the exact same thing that everybody else had told me. Maybe next week, bud. But I answered the phone anyway, trying my best to hide the fact that I was in tears moments earlier. The person that called me was my good buddy Marty, and he sounded very excited to talk to me. And I hadn't spoken to him for a few months, maybe even a year, but it felt as if no time had passed at all. And he almost immediately asked me when I was going to be home to visit. But I told him, I'm actually currently home. And I didn't ask him to get together that day because of the previous responses that I got, but I was super surprised with what he said. He wanted to hang out that day. He was over the moon excited about the fact that I was home. He immediately started asking me when I was free to hang out. And I insecurely told him, like, I have nothing going on, and it's totally okay if you can't hang out until next weekend. And I thought Marty, in particular, would not be able to hang out on short notice. He was probably the smartest of all of my childhood friends, just straight up school-wise. And I knew that he had a really good coding job on top of being in school, getting who knows how many multiple degrees. He was honestly the one person out of all of my friends that I thought definitely wouldn't have time to hang out on short notice. But today he did. Not only did he have time, he demanded that I make time for him ASAP. He told me that he didn't have time that very day, but he would clear his schedule the next day, and he demanded that we spend the entire day together to catch up. And he made me feel so much better at that moment. I felt so wanted and appreciated. But those feelings blinded me to what was actually going on. I should have known that something was off with this, but I wasn't thinking straight. I remember that he specifically told me that he wanted to be the first to see me and demanded that I don't see any of our other friends before I see him. And I thought that was a little bit funny at the time. It made me feel a little bit special that he wanted to be the first person to see me when I got back. This is where it starts to get a little bit weird. He also expressed to me that he had recently tried acid for the first time, and he wanted to do some with me. See, Marty never did drugs in high school. He was more of a brewski, ciggy kind of guy. He wasn't a pothead, acid, tie-dye t-shirt type. But I had told him about the couple times that I had tried acid in high school, 2 of those times being at Six Flags, which is a story for another time. But he referenced those 2 stories and was trying to express to me that he wanted to share an experience like that with me. And again, this should have been a red flag. Not talking to somebody for almost a year and they're like, hey dude, let's do drugs together the first time we've seen each other. but I wanted to do something adventurous, and this filled that gap. I was actively looking for something wild and reckless to do to feel like myself again. I also hadn't done any acid in a couple years, so I was like, all right, why not? And let me make this extremely clear, it was the worst decision of my life, and it haunts me to this day. The level of embarrassment that I feel around this story, telling this story, is ungodly. It feels like a real deep shame, borderline nauseating to tell, but I'll continue. So there I am, getting off this highly enthusiastic phone call with my high school buddy with plans to meet at the Lincoln Park Zoo the very next day, to freaking drop some acid on a Wednesday afternoon in September on one day's notice on a bum hip. And for some reason, at that time, at that moment in time, it felt like a solution, and I was excited for it. I had no idea that I was walking into a legitimate ambush, and nothing about this seemingly wholesome hangout was pure. But I got up the next morning, I took the train into the city, and I met Marty a couple blocks away from the zoo. And when I was first walking up to him, shaking his hand, giving him a hug, really drinking him in, I didn't notice anything off about him. He was dressed how he was usually dressed. His hairstyle hadn't changed. He hadn't grown out any facial hair. He looked very similar to the last time I saw him. He was lean like he always was. Nothing about his appearance drew any red flags. He was wearing a pair of black Ray-Bans, which wasn't uncommon for him, and he seemed very lively. He seemed in good spirits. And almost right off the bat, he's talking my ear off about what he's been up to. He's pumped to see me. I'm pumped to see him. And he starts sharing these realizations that he's been having, these epiphanies, and how he's been approaching life these days. And from what he was telling me, it sounded like he was in a transitionary period in his life very similar to the position I was in. I really wish I had known how much had changed with him, but at the time I was still in the dark. And he kept telling me how excited he was to trip with me, and was referencing things that I had told him years earlier about some trips that I had had. And he was referencing things that I honestly didn't remember telling him. Not as if he knew things that I had never mentioned to him, like he knew these big secrets about me. It was more as if he was referencing things that meant so little to me and were just kind of like mundane memories of an acid trip that it was surprising that he remembered them. I did start to think that that was a little bit weird in that moment, because he was referencing these things that I had told him as if he was trying to sell me on the idea of tripping with him that day, even though I had already agreed to it, so there was no need to sell it to me. Nothing about the situation made much sense, but like I said, I was blinded. I was pumped to be here. I wanted to feel wanted, and I wanted to do something reckless, so I looked past that red flag. And I want to make this extremely clear to anybody that is watching. I do not advocate for acid. And I'm not saying that to save face or to act like I'm some good guy. Honest to God, I think that that stuff is very bad for you, bad for your mental health, physical health, brain health. And I think I was very stupid to take it like candy. I think it is seriously unnatural, dangerous, and can potentially alter your life if you take it in the wrong setting. But luckily, even at that age, I was very aware of the dangers of it and how taking it in the wrong environment could really mess you up. I knew that you had to enter trips with your mind right, with good intentions, and there was something about the way that he was talking to me that made me feel like he might not be ready to take something like this. And in that moment, I decided that I should probably do my best to stay as sober as possible, just in case I need to take care of him or be a trip sitter. And I didn't want to ruin his day or bum him out by telling him that I was backing out. I was just going to secretly kind of spit it out and make him think that I took it with him. And then another red flag. It's actually something that he said to me. He said it would really bum me out if you didn't trip with me today. And for me, that was enough to validate my decision on spitting this tab out as quickly as I possibly could when he wasn't looking. So right before we entered the zoo, we sat on one of those little park benches right outside of the zoo, right near the entrance. And Marty reached into his pocket and pulled out this dainty little piece of folded tinfoil. He peeled it open and revealed about 10 tabs of acid. Again, internally, I thought that was a little bit weird why he had 10. I assumed that he had 2 in like a little baggie, but who am I to judge the packaging options of whatever drug dealer he bought it from? And I didn't bother asking any questions because I had already made the decision that I was spitting this thing out the second he turned around. And he reached into his little tin foil and he pinched one of the tabs, placed it into my palm, and I looked down at it, and it had just a little icon of a smiley face on it. And he did the same with his. He picked his up, he held it up for a cheers. We cheersed it. I was sitting there a little bit apprehensive because I know that this means a 10-hour commitment to kaleidoscoping, but he just threw it in like it was a piece of gum or a Tic Tac. Like this was just another day and he needed to freshen his breath. I didn't toss it in like he did. I very delicately placed it into my mouth, right on my tongue that I had already strategically made a pool of saliva on, so it would kind of sit in a pool of saliva and wouldn't touch my gums or my tongue or seep into my pores. I was doing my best to keep it in the middle of my mouth so I could spit it out the second he turned around. Whatever acid was seeping out of the tab, I wanted to spit that out too. I was really trying to stay as sober as possible. And I'm extremely grateful to this day that I was that cautious, that I didn't just blindly trust that tab. Because the second I threw it in my mouth, Marty leaned towards me and pulled his sunglasses away from his eyes. And it was the first time that day that we made real eye contact. The first time that I had really seen his eyes. And I broke out in a cold sweat on that bench when he intensely said to me, "Me and you are gonna figure this out today," which is an incredibly vague and innocent sentence when you aren't looking to the eyes of somebody who has clearly been tripping before he arrived. This man was wearing those sunglasses to hide his eyes from me because his pupils were completely dilated already. His eyes had this glassy sheen over them. He wasn't blinking whatsoever, and he had this raw gaze as if he was seeing the world for the first time. His eyes also had a slight bulge to them, as if they were trying to escape from his skull, but the massive bags that had pulled under his eyes were holding his eyeballs in place. This was the only difference in his appearance, and if he had kept his glasses on, I would have never known that he had already taken a tab that day. But he slid his glasses back on, stood up and started walking to the front gate. And the moment he turned around, right when he looked towards the entrance, I just spit into the grass the entire pool of saliva that I'd built up in my mouth from not replying to him with this tab of acid turning on all of my saliva glands. I spit out a pool of it, and I tried my best to not swallow any of it. I immediately took a swig of my water bottle, quietly swished it around my mouth, and spit that out too. And even after that, I actively did not swallow any saliva for at least 5 minutes. Once we had entered the zoo, I told him that I had to use the bathroom really quick before we started checking out the exhibits, and all he did in reply was stick out his tongue to show me the tab of acid on his tongue. And he did like a little like rock star symbol with his hand, like He was clearly already completely out of it, but I hadn't even started feeling the effects yet. And to be honest, I was hoping that I didn't feel anything. I was hoping that I had spit it out fast enough and I was gonna get zero effects. And I know that acid seeps into your gums and into your pores in your mouth. I know that you don't have to swallow it, but I felt like I did a good job of spitting it out and washing it out, but I wanted to go to the bathroom to wash it out thoroughly. So I got in that bathroom, I continued to wash out my mouth and hawking up every bit of saliva and mucus that I possibly could to ensure that I absorbed the smallest amount of that drug as possible. I felt completely sober when I left that bathroom, but still, it does usually take about 15 to 30 minutes for that to kick in anyway. So I left that bathroom hoping for the best, and I walked up to him and I pretended to be super pumped to embrace the day trip at the zoo. So I walk up to Marty and I'm expecting to talk about the zoo and what exhibits we're gonna see. But the first thing that he said to me was, "You didn't spit it out, did you?" So now he went from oddly pressuring me to take it to now monitoring my consumption of it. But I tried to brush it off by saying, "No, but I'm definitely gonna swallow it soon because it tastes nasty." And that was enough to get him off my back about it because I didn't even mention spitting it out. I was like, dude, I'm gonna swallow this thing. And then I tried my best to embrace this zoo day, to be excited about the animals and the different exhibits that they offered. And I even did my best to try to enter what you would call like a stoner conversation to make him feel like I was embracing this day with him and he would remember it fondly. Just opening up questions and conversations like, yo, you think these animals know they're at a zoo? Like, bro, do you think 5 dudes could take out a chimpanzee? I was just trying to bring up things that I thought would create a fun conversation between us and just build like a jokey, laughy dialogue so he could enjoy his day and his trip. But every time I tried to bring up a fun conversation, he would just look at me, not reply, do the rock star hand thing and just stick his tongue out, and then he would follow that up with only one phrase on repeat. Bro, we gotta figure this out. Clearly, this man was fully tripping already and he was not capable of embracing me in any type of conversation. So I just tried my best to enjoy the zoo for myself and make sure that old Marty didn't stray too far away. And if I'm being completely honest with you, after the 4th, bro, we gotta just figure this out, I completely gave up on talking to him. And he didn't seem to strike up any conversation with me. He just seemed to follow me to whatever exhibit I wanted to go to like a little duck. It wasn't exactly the adventure I was looking for. To be honest, I felt pretty alone even in his presence. But after about a half hour, I found myself in the bird exhibit, really enjoying myself. The birds were so colorful and beautiful flying overhead, and the chirps and the melodies were just so beautiful. The exhibit was filled with exotic flowers that smelled great, and there was misters throughout the whole exhibit that just fell onto your skin. The water vapor hit your skin, and it was so cool. There was butterflies fluttering in every direction, landing on you, and my clothes felt so good on my skin. The tension in my back was released, and I felt like I could breathe deeply into my diaphragm for the first time since surgery. I was high as a kite. Dude, I was higher than a kite. I was a damn blimp. I didn't even notice this major transition into a deep trip. Every other time that I had ever taken a tab or any type of hallucinogenic, it was like a slow drip. You noticed it. Things started moving. You started like kind of seeing pulses in tree bark. You noticed it was coming. This one came out of nowhere. Moments earlier, I was completely rational and sober, just reading signs, looking over the map, like checking like when am I gonna catch the train home? Like I knew what was going on. To all of a sudden, I was gone, wandering around this bird exhibit like a mollied out rave chick, tasting sounds and seeing smells. Luckily, I was in a very pretty environment and enjoying myself. The trip so far had a fairly good start, and even though I was at a low point in my life at the time, I do believe that I truly have positivity in my heart. And I've never truly had a bad trip because in my core, I believe that I truly have a gratitude for life. At least that's what I've noticed in the experiences that I've had. It's always brought me on a journey of gratitude, not a journey of despair. And I say that I was lucky because I hadn't come to the conclusion at the time that I've come to now. Because today, me, the person talking to you right now, knows that without a shadow of a doubt that the tab that Marty gave me that day had about 5 doses on it at least. And there's no way to tell me that it didn't. He gave me so many doses on that one tab that it would have turned my entire vision into a kaleidoscoping alternate reality. And not only did he pressure me to take it without inspecting it or asking him any questions about it, he also tried to make sure that I held it in my mouth to get the full effect. And I only came to that conclusion later because at that moment, that day, I was not in my right mind. When I sobered up and I actually thought about the situation in general, I realized how quickly I had spit it out. It never should have had that level of effect on me. And I know how cautious I was. I know how thoroughly I washed out my mouth. And before you correct me, I understand that it probably got into my system a bit, regardless of how quickly I spit it out or how I pulled the saliva in my mouth so it wouldn't touch my gums. But you cannot convince me that it would have that level of effect when I spit it out so quickly. I was higher than I had ever been, and I was intentionally dosed by my friend, and it overtook my system like a virus corrupting a computer. But the scariest part of this entire situation was not the fact that my friend was trying to drug me. It was the fact that he popped the exact same thing like it was a piece of candy, and he's chewing on this thing like it's bubble gum. He's left it in this entire time. He has gotten the full effects, and not only that, he had taken one prior to even meeting up with me. If I got the major effects that I got after I spit it out, this kid must be in a completely different dimension. But there I am, wandering from exhibit to exhibit, pressing my face against the glass, trying to get face to face with a 100-year-old tortoise to ask him what the 1930s were like. I'm in there whispering to anacondas like I'm the heir to Slytherin, looking through the tops of my eyes trying to talk telepathically to the orangutans. Because something in those orangutans' eyes tell me that they know how to talk, they know what I'm saying, they just don't want to pay taxes. I am full-blown tripping, completely immersed in the experience of this zoo. I was doing what we set out to do that day. I'm wandering around this zoo having a good-ass time. I'm in my own world, thinking I'm traveling the world, walking around studying these exotic animals. And if I'm being honest, I was so outside of my own reality and so in this warped safari reality that I stopped taking tabs on Marty. I had not checked in on him in I don't know how long. It might have been a full hour since I didn't turn around and check in on him. Though that orangutan had a sense of humor. It wasn't that I was ignoring him. It was the fact that he gave me an ultra dose of acid and I hadn't realized it yet. And he wouldn't even talk to me. He wouldn't entertain any conversation. you just give me the rock star sign, stick his tongue out like he was Meg the Stallion, and he just let me loose in a zoo? Obviously, I'm not going to pay attention to it. It didn't even cross my mind during that time as I was reaching the peak of this trip to talk to him. I had all of these other animals to talk to that were far more interesting and far more willing to have conversations. Off topic, a tiger whispered to me as it was strolling past to come into its enclosure. I said no, and I told it that I knew its tricks. It wasn't going to pull a fast one on me. And this thing whispered back to me, "Oh, you're a smart boy." As of right now, I know that didn't happen, but at the moment, I felt accomplished because I felt like the tiger admired my wit. But as I turned around to tell Marty to not listen to the tiger because I felt like this was a pressing issue, Marty is following so close behind me, like his big toe is pressed up against my heel, and I could smell his breath when I turned around. His jaw was hanging open, almost as if his mouth was disconnected from the top of his skull, and his bottom lip was heavy and hanging, exposing his bottom teeth like he was bubblegum shrimp. And it's just hanging there, and he's staring at me, and he's no longer wearing his glasses, and his eyes were wide and manic. They were just as glazy as before, with no pupil left. And this man was crying at me. He wasn't crying in general, he was crying at me. Before I had even turned around, he was right behind me, staring at the back of my head, mouth completely wide open and agape, crying hard. And now that I had turned around, he's staring directly into my eyes, crying relentlessly, tears streaming down his face, crying at me. He wasn't sobbing or whimpering or sniffling or crying like a normal person. He was standing there motionless, crying without moving a finger, almost like the guy from the movie Get Out while he's being hypnotized. But his expression was far more intense, even a little bit more sinister. He looked like a caricature of himself, just filled with despair. And the drugs that were flowing through my system did not help with his appearance. In fact, I wasn't even aware if he actually looked like that or if it was the drugs in my system that was making his appearance change in front of me. But as I was standing there looking at him, trying to drink in the whole situation, trying to get a gauge of what is real and what is fake, I'm able to see other people's faces in the distance, and they're no different. No one else was doing this. Everyone else looked normal, even if they were looking a little wiggly and their hair color was popping a little bit more. They weren't doing what he was doing. He was standing in front of me, staring directly into my face, crying at me. And my initial thought is that, oh my god, my friend's trip has gone bad. He probably doesn't like that all of these animals are stuck in these cages. He's just feeling very emotional. He's not liking what he's seeing. His empathy is flowing out of him, but I could talk him down. I could turn this trip around. And the first thing that comes to my high-ass brain is, I just gotta take this man to the giraffes, because if he sees the giraffes and how much they seem to like their enclosure, he'll start to feel a little bit better about this situation. He just needs to get the vibes of the giraffe pen. I could be so wrong about this, but to me it seems as if giraffes seem to kind of like enclosures that they could just graze all day and not have to deal with predators. But that doesn't matter. The reality is that was the solution in my compromised mind at the time. And I'm just like, Marty, dude, come on, come look at the giraffe, man. It's gonna make you feel better about all this. So I start walking him in that direction. I know exactly where to go. I was eyeing the giraffe exhibit for the past 20 minutes. I knew I was headed that way, and I'm trying to speak positive affirmations into my friend. He was clearly losing the battle to this trip, and as I kept trying to speak positivity into him, it seemed as if I broke through to him at one point. I don't even remember what I said. It didn't seem to be that powerful of a sentence, but he quickly wiped his tears and he just kind of stood upright as if like, I'm okay, and then just did the rock out, tongue out sign at me. At this point of the story, I don't want you to think about this from my perspective or as if you were there with me. I want you to imagine as if you were at this zoo at the same time we were, with one of your young children or one of your young nieces or nephews. Or even take yourself back in time and imagine you're one of the hundreds of kids that are in that zoo that day on a field trip. And you saw me holding Marty's hand, walking him up the stairs to the giraffes. And I'm just waddling up these stairs to feed these giraffes, pouring kibble into his hand and pointing toward the giraffe I want him to feed. And as you're waiting for your turn to feed the giraffe, the grown man in front of you won't move. And he also won't even look at the giraffe. He's standing there with his arm out, not looking at the giraffe, putting its tongue all over his hand, staring at me, shaking his head with his bottom lip swinging, panic crying. And he's clearly cracked out on something by the look in his eyes. And I wanted you to picture that from your perspective, not being in our little party, in our little group, in this crazy trip world. I wanted you to realize how bizarre embarrassing and inappropriate that scene would be. Because in that very moment, as he's shaking his head, violently crying at me, I realized what it must have looked like from someone else's perspective. And I realized how many children were around us and how big of freaks and creeps we must have looked like. I became hyper aware of how moronic this idea was and how immature and gross this behavior was. I realized that we're ruining this experience for the children and families around us. I had never felt that level of embarrassment in my life. I wanted to run away from that situation and leave him there. And I never wanted to see any of those people again that were staring at us like we were freaks. They were looking at us like we were deranged drug addicts, and I can't blame them. But to be honest, they were specifically looking at him. But I was with him, and he was crying at me. Even though I didn't look as bad as him, I didn't look as bizarre, I was still a part of this disgusting behavior. And I doubt I looked like him. I was having a good time talking to the tortoises and wandering the zoo. I probably looked like a really pleasant guy that you would like to walk up to and have a conversation with. But he looked like he was going through a dark spiritual transition. But in that moment, my judgment was not great. I was compromised by whatever drug that he gave me. That was a bad place to find myself. Mentally compromised with somebody who is an absolute liability. The man wouldn't talk. He would only intensely cry, give me one-liners and like a rock star sign, and it was disturbing to see. He looked like at any moment his body was going to start levitating and contorting like Vecna was squeezing his limbs and snapping them apart from the upside down. But that's not what I thought in the moment. This is actually where my head went at that moment, so you realized how compromised I was. This is what I thought. I shit you not. What I thought was, I can't leave this guy here because that tiger is going to convince him to go into that enclosure. I was standing there thinking about how much of a little trickster that tiger was. I was out of it too. But in my crazy mind at the time, that was enough for me to think, I need to take this kid with me. I cannot leave him here. All I knew is that I was absolutely not staying where I was. So I grabbed this kid by the shirt and I started pulling him down the stairs from the giraffe feeding station towards the front entrance to get this kid out of the zoo as quickly as I possibly can. I'm dragging this kid by the collar like I'm his grandma scolding him. And we're passing all of the exhibits that we passed on the way to where we were. And we passed that orangutan. Finally, this thing talks back to me and he just goes, "Your friend doesn't look so good." And I replied as I was running by this guy while I was white-knuckling his t-shirt. I knew you could talk, but I was too busy to stay and chat and explain how the IRS worked to this guy. But anyway, the embarrassment of what we must have looked like. Marty frozen in this odd state of relentless crying and me bickering with animals as we're passing by them. It must have been a sight to see from the outside looking in. But eventually we got out of there. I got out of the exit and I took him to an isolated area of the park that surrounded the zoo just to try to calm him down and isolate him. And in my mind, I was just going over all of the different tactics I could use to get him to stop crying. It was an absolutely beautiful day, and that area of the city is absolutely gorgeous. So once we were out of the zoo and I stopped having all of those judgmental eyeballs staring at me, my nerves really started to calm down. And that grass felt really good when I sat down on it. I was trying to battle my own mind to push away that deep sense of euphoria. At least as long as I had this liability on my hands, I couldn't fall back into a blissful trip as this kid is freaking out crying. But I stood up, I stopped caressing the grass, and I got him to sit down on that lovely grass and put his back against a tree, and he was in a place that I was pretty happy with where I placed him. I thought he could probably calm down there, and I made the mistake of turning away from him. All I wanted to do was take in my surroundings so I could make an educated next move. I wanted to go over all of my options of how I could get out of this situation. But the second I turned around, I got sucked back into the world of everything is blissful and beautiful. And that life is love and colors are blessings and our senses are privileges that we take for granted. And the youth that we're experiencing in that moment is beautiful and fleeting. Waves of warm positivity were washing over me as I was basking in the warm summer sunlight. Literally just by turning around, this is how out of my mind I was. I forgot what Marty was doing. I forgot he was there. I was immediately back in this beautiful reality, feeling every sense that I had. And I waddle over to a park bench, blinking all slowly, taking in my surroundings, smiling at strangers, and I take a seat on a lovely park bench. And I'm sitting there with my knees close together, just looking at all the couples enjoying their picnics, watching strangers live a blissful life and being very fascinated with the fact that squirrels could like climb trees backwards and defy gravity. I don't know how long I was sitting there admiring everything around me, but to be honest, I could have stayed there until this trip was over with how much of a good time I was having. But all of a sudden, I felt this looming outside force that felt like it was overtaking my little bubble of hope. I changed my seating position. I had opened my legs wide. I put my elbows on my knees. I intertwined my fingers and rested my chin on the top of my knuckles. So I was sitting on this bench leaning quite a bit forward. So when I turned around to investigate the looming cloud of despair encroaching on my hope bubble, I come to see Marty white-knuckling the back of the bench on his tippy toes, leaning over me as far as he can. He was leaning over so far that it was like he was trying to have his tears land on my lower back so I would notice him. He was on his tippy toes, bottom lip hanging, staring at the back of my head, seemingly investigating for lice, the same way he was looking at me back in the zoo. At that point, I got upset. I was fed up with his behavior. I felt like he was intentionally trying to encroach on me and ruin my trip. And the way he was doing it, the way he was looking at me, the consistency in which he was doing it felt like he was attacking me personally, and I demanded to know what he was doing. What is up with him? Like, you need to give me some form of explanation. And the second I gave him that slightly aggressive reaction, like, I'm not scared of you, tell me what is going on, he immediately postured up and started wiping his tears and went right back to normal as if he wasn't just hanging over me, crying on my back. And then he started giving me this unsettling, long-winded answer about how he wasn't liking the life that he was living and how he wanted to desperately go back to the days where we would just spend our whole summers, every single day of every summer at the parks, just spending time with our friends, and how he didn't want to live in the current state that he lived. The whole thing seemed genuine at first. It seemed as if his trip took a bad direction and he was reminiscing on old times, and he really just wanted to be back there and wanted to spend more time with his friends. He was clearly dealing with the reality of becoming a man and the responsibilities that come with that, which wasn't very different from what I had been going through and what I had been struggling with and what made me do this with him. But this kid just kept going on and on, saying the exact same thing, just in a slightly different way, changing one word here, one word there, but just kept repeating himself realistically, like he was a broken record. And he did it over and over again until it almost seemed intentional from my perspective. Like, I would say something to try to change the direction of the conversation, try to wrap up that one topic and move on to something a little bit more positive, but somehow he would find a way to loop it back to that exact conversation and that exact sentence, which was wishing that we could go back to how things used to be. So I start freaking out because I think I'm stuck in some type of acid time loop, or he was, and he physically wasn't able to stop repeating himself. And I thought he wasn't doing this voluntarily until he did something very odd. Randomly, as I try to change the subject and I'm mid-sentence, he's looking at me with the intensity that he's been looking at me all day, but he randomly puts his thumbs by his ears and wiggles his fingers and sticks his tongue out like he's doing na-na-na-na boo-boo. And my knee-jerk reaction to this was obviously to stop mid-sentence and be like, what are you doing? But right when I stopped talking, he stopped doing it and immediately went back into that same broken record sentence. So this kid just broke my train of thought and threw a na-na-na-na boo-boo at me to get me to stop talking so he could continue his broken record. And at that point, I'm standing there in utter awe at how committed he is to repeating himself. And all he's saying is just how better life would be if it went back to how it used to be. It felt like he was trying to brainwash me into thinking the exact same thing. If he repeated it enough, I would be on board. I couldn't wrap my head around the na-na-na-na boo-boo thing either, and I couldn't put a finger on why it disturbed me so much at the moment. But in hindsight, I think it was because I realized that he was actively trying to manipulate me. Not to mention, tried to drug me, and then on top of that, mocked me to my face. But I didn't put that together in the moment. I was so overstimulated and unsure what to do with this situation. Not to mention, every time I looked away from this kid for some other option or help or opportunity, the kid started crying at the back of my head. So I finally cut this kid off after the 40th time he says the same thing, and I tell him that I want to go back to his house, when realistically what I wanted to do was drop him off at his house and bounce. But I framed my proposition as, we should go back to your house so we can play some video games like the old times. And to be fair, if he was trying to manipulate me, I was going to do it back to him. And if he wanted to go back to how things used to be, we used to play video games all the time. So hey, let's get out of public and let's go into private where I don't have to be embarrassed by your presence. I thought it was going to have to take some convincing, but oddly enough, he was very excited. He was willing to go back to his place. He wasn't exactly excited about going to play the video games like I proposed. It was more that he was excited to go back to his place. I was also under the impression at that moment that he had roommates. He had told me he had roommates. I was under the impression that he had a very nice apartment with multiple roommates, and I wanted to dump him off to his roommates because I felt like it was a little bit more responsible to dump him off to his sober roommates who could handle him in that state, because clearly I wasn't capable of doing it because I'm in a similar state as he is. And again, I thought his apartment was super nice and would have really good vibes because I know that he had a really good coding job. I even remember him FaceTiming me a few years earlier when he moved in, and it was like a dream pad for a college kid. Super nice, in a great area, nice hardwoods, exposed brick, in an area with great restaurants and nightlife. So if there was one thing that can knock this bad trip out of this kid, it would probably be the super nice place that he lives with his nice bed where he could sleep off the drugs. But as we're walking towards his place and I'm doing my best to zone out from his unbearable repetitiveness, I realized that we walked straight through the area that I thought he lived in, and we started entering a not so nice area. It's not that this area was horrible, it was just a bit run down and a little bit less fancy. I cut him off after the 457th time he said the same thing, and I said something along the lines of, "Did we miss a turn somewhere?" And he briefly answered my question with something along the lines of, "No, that's where my stuff used to be. My new place is up there to the right. But I just wish things could go back to how they used to be, man, and I just think we need to figure that out." So his new place is right around here somewhere. I'm almost home free, but he managed to even twist that answer back to the same things that he's been repeating. So I'm still trying to zone him out, but block by block I noticed that this area is getting more and more sketchy. There's litter everywhere, and there's a bunch of homeless people lying in the street and hunched over, just kind of wandering around. There's tent encampments. It's starting to get like a place you don't want to walk through. There's no more restaurants or storefronts or kind strangers walking by saying what's up. Marty doesn't even seem like he's noticing it. And right as I'm about to tell him that I think we missed a turn somewhere and we should probably head back to the nice area before we get robbed here, he abruptly turns and pops open a door to a 3-flat. This is a super rundown building. The whole thing is light blue and basically falling apart. You can see exposed wood from where mildew is taking over the wood and it's falling off. This place looks like the floors on the inside probably have holes in them. But before I know it, before I could question him about this building and why he would move out of the really nice building he was in and into this one, I'm halfway up the stairs with him to his new apartment. And once we get up this flight of stairs, I notice that he just pops open the second door, and he never took out a key to open this door. And he quickly opened the first one, so he must have not used a key for that one either. Both of his doors were unlocked, so I assumed optimistically at the moment that one of his other roommates were home, because who leaves all of their doors unlocked like that, especially in this area? But I realized why he didn't bother locking them the moment I stepped inside. For lack of a better term, this apartment was a dump. I was so confused as to what I was looking at. There was like a TV and some basic furniture, but all the furniture looked like it was dumpster dived. There was no way this apartment was up to code for a tenant to pay rent and live there. No one in their right mind would pay a landlord to live in a place like this. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. He was not paying a landlord for this place. He was squatting here. This place was abandoned when he found it, and he dragged a couple pieces of furniture up here and wanders in and out as he pleases. That's why the doors were unlocked. He didn't even have a key to this place. And that's when I really started panicking, because I thought I was going to have help here. I thought I was walking into a situation with roommates and sober people and support. But instead, I just walked into a trap house with pissy furniture and a TV with its extension cord hanging out the window to plug into somebody else's power source. I was dragging my feet through this place, half expecting the floor to give out under me, and I was kind of peeking around every corner, half expecting an addict to pop out of every room. I didn't know what to say to Marty or what to say in general because I was still tripping. And it's not like these things were wearing off. If anything, I was entering what most people who have tried these drugs would call the peak. I felt the effects of the drugs ramping up, and if there was any place, any setting that would set off a bad trip, it would be where I was. I got finished checking every bedroom in there for strangers because I didn't know who was there. Anybody could have been in that random squatting building. But after I found out the coast was clear, I called back to Marty. It felt like it took every ounce of my energy to speak, and the only thing that I could say in that moment was, "So, this is your place?" And I heard him call back with his reply from what would be considered the living room in a place like that. I barely heard him reply, "It's one of them," and I could barely hear him because he was clearly moving some piece of large furniture. I managed to make my way back to the doorway of the living room, planning on asking him what he meant by "it's one of them," but instead when I looked into the room, I came to the realization that he wasn't moving furniture around. That wasn't what I was hearing. He was removing floorboards. There was a stack of floorboards next to the blotchy, cracked, ashy coffee table. And on top of this gross coffee table, he had laid out a spread of something that I assumed he was trying to surprise me with, as if I was going to be excited about what he pulled out from under the floorboards. And I slowly make my way up to this table to try to find out if my eyes were deceiving me, and I needed a closer look. And as much as I was tripping, I was seeing clearly what was on this table. It was every drug that I've ever heard of, sprawled across this table as if he was presenting it to me. Every option under the sun, from uppers to lowers to stimulants to sedatives to party drugs to Adderall to bongs to pipes, from shrooms to tabs, from ketamine to coke. There was even a bottle of purple Sprite, and next to that there was this glass jar with a clear liquid that had a dropper next to it. Dude, I'm telling you, white powder, blue rocks, gummy bears, brownies, syringes, misery, and addiction. And I'm just standing there trying to comprehend what I'm looking at and realizing what I was brought into today. This wasn't a playful hangout with an old friend. This was a trap. So I start to raise my gaze to look at my longtime friend who's sitting on this tattered, pissy couch. And he was just sitting there with his feet and knees really close together as if he was trying to fit on a crowded bus. And he had his hands folded in his lap delicately. It took every ounce of my being to get myself to look at his face. My trip is reaching its peak and the drabness of the room is pulsing with intensity. It felt like all of reality was a blend of grays and browns and blacks, with Marty sitting at the middle of it. And he's sitting there delicately as if he's trying to take up as little space as possible, even though he has the whole couch to himself. And he has his jaw open with his upper lip down, but this time he's smiling while he's doing it, as if he's a Neanderthal trying to mock me. And his eyes are surrounded by wrinkles from his contorted smile as his tears are trying to fall straight down his face but going around his bulbous cheekbones. And the delicate way that he was sitting didn't match how much sheer effort was going into his forced, disturbing expression. And I was standing there staring at him as my entire world is kaleidoscoping around him until he tilted his head like he was a confused dog. And it was as if when he shifted his head to the side, my reality shifted dramatically. The room around me stopped moving, and all of a sudden I could clearly see my surroundings. But his appearance completely changed. It felt like the veil of reality was pulled off of me. And I was no longer looking at my friend anymore. I was seeing the essence of what my friend was. Something else was sitting where he sat. I don't know if I was looking at the essence of his being or if it was something else that was inside him corrupting his being, but I saw something that I could only explain to you as a crying demon. I'm standing in this squatter's hut with this table with every drug imaginable, and a crying creature sitting where my friend sat, staring at me curiously. And I couldn't help but think this thing was looking at me with curiosity because it thought that I might be seeing it, that I wasn't seeing him, that I was actually seeing what was inside of him. Like, was it curious that I knew it was there, that I could see it? Did it know that I knew my friend wasn't there with me anymore? And this thing was like a pale figure, like porcelain white skin that looked pasty and slimy to the touch. And the texture of its skin looked like the skin on chicken feet, where it's kind of rolly. And its entire body was that texture. It had no clothes covering it. And its legs and its arms were incredibly small, as if it could barely move around on its own. But its head was sitting on this strong neck that was hunched forward with cartoonish bad posture. And its face was very similar to the expression that Marty was making before it made the switch. It was just holding this fake, forced smile with sobbing eyes, and its face was unusually round, unhumanly round, and the entire thing was covered in horrendous wrinkles. But the most disturbing part about what I was looking at was that its eyes didn't change. I could see that it had Marty's eyes, and when I realized that, when I saw that, I saw its expression change. It must have noticed that I noticed, because its forced inhuman smile plummeted into this round frown. And in that moment, at the peak of this trip, I was convinced that I was sharing this room with a straight up demon. But as quickly as this thing appeared, with one blink, it turned back into my friend Marty, and I was in that room again. And there's my friend sitting there on that couch, frowning, sobbing, crying at me, but this time he's holding up a sheet of acid. There must have been 100 tabs on that one sheet, and this man had the audacity to say to me, "There's nothing in this world I want to do more than the rest of this acid with you." I ran out of that building in that moment, and I gave Marty no explanation as to why I left. And I didn't feel like I owed him an explanation. I came to the realization that my friend had fallen into this deep, dark addiction, and he was trying to drag me into it with him. By dosing me and then bringing me to that trap house and presenting all of these drugs to me, I felt like it was the right thing to do to leave. I didn't feel like I had to tell him a damn thing. And also, let's not forget, I was completely and 100% convinced that he was possessed by a demon. But still, the entire run to the train station, as I was fleeing that trap house, I was filled with guilt for leaving him there alone. But I was in a pure panic. I really thought I watched him transform into something else. He dosed me with heavy drugs. He can't be mad at me. I'm not a bad person for leaving that situation. I was off the shits too. I really believe that if I stayed in that situation, I would end up just like him, a pasty white demon trapped in a trap house. And the train ride home was not fun either. Anybody that has taken the CTA in Chicago knows that those trains are not much of a step up from that horrible trap house. But nobody turned into the Antichrist on the train car, so it wasn't half bad. And when I managed to finally get home, I felt so filthy with the guilt and embarrassment that I had felt that day. The acid was finally wearing off, and the only thing that I wanted to do was sleep it off, stay in my room, and just feel better and get over this day. I took a shower to get clean physically and metaphorically. I had to wash those sins off my body, and I cozied up in my bedroom, threw on some calm music, and just tried to go to sleep. And when I woke up the next morning, I actually didn't feel so bad. My brain did feel a little bit dehydrated and quite a bit fried, but I knew that a glass of water, a cup of coffee, and a meal would set me straight. I remember just laying in my room, half asleep, enjoying the sounds of the morning. I'm just hearing my parents bop around the kitchen, making breakfast and chatting. It felt so good to be sober and comfy and safe and in my own room. The relief that I felt to be over that nightmare was unmatched. I smelled the coffee brewing, and right when I was about to get up and join my parents downstairs, I heard the knob on my door kind of jiggling. It sounded like somebody was trying to get into my room without waking me up. And most of the time, on the weekends, my mom would come into my room sneakily, bring me a cup of coffee, wake me up with a couple pats on the head, and invite me to go run errands with her. And running errands with my mom means grabbing some brunch and just poking around some convenience stores. And I was really looking forward to pretending to be asleep and allowing my mom to caress my hair for a little bit before waking up. And I was totally gonna go on these errands with my mom. After what happened the day before, I needed a wholesome hangout, and I needed some guidance from my mom about what happened. And I also want to address this. That day was the last time I ever touched a substance like that. I think I had a few beers on my birthday that year, but that year was also the last year that I've ever drank. This experience was a major turning point in my life, and it showed me what drugs actually do to people. It really made me flip the switch and get my priorities straight. I didn't want to drown under the pressure of manhood and responsibilities. I wanted to step up to the plate, thrive, and be a rock for everybody in my life. So that's exactly what I did from that day moving forward. I vowed to myself that I was getting my life together. Anyway, I got up because I locked my door the night before, so I was gonna pop it open, let my mom know that I'll be ready in 10 minutes to go on the errands with her. So I throw on my robe and I pop my door open for her, only to be met with the same eyes that I ran from the night before. Marty was outside of my bedroom door, trying to get in at 9 a.m. the next morning. He showed up to my house the night after I fled his apartment. I was questioning if I was still tripping or I was having some type of sleep paralysis fever dream, and I'm standing there questioning if I'm going to start talking to this kid or if I'm going to kick him in the chest down the stairs. But then I heard my mom call up to me from downstairs, so I must not be seeing a sleep paralysis demon. She just goes, "Dougie, Marty's here for you." This man came to my house, knocked on my door, and talked to my parents. They let him go up to my room, so he must be here sober to apologize for the night before. There's no other reason this kid could be here other than to apologize to me, to try to clear the air. But he's standing on my stairs, looking at me, mocking my facial expressions of fear and dread. But as he's mocking my facial expressions, the outside of his lips are twitching as if he's trying to hold in laughter, as if he's enjoying doing this to me. And he's standing there, and I feel like this kid is making fun of me to my face. I didn't know what else to say at that moment other than, "What are you doing here?" I had so many other questions for him. One being, why are you wearing the same clothes as yesterday? Another one, why did you give me such a heavy dose? And how about a third? Why didn't you tell me you were taking me into a squatter's building? There was just so much to ask this kid, so much I didn't know about the situation. But all I got in return from my question was a dirty little smirk. And as he's giving me this weirdo little smirk, he lightly revealed his tongue from behind his lips. He just wanted to show me very delicately that he had a smiley face tab on his tongue, and he only showed me for a split second, as if it was our little secret, as if I was in on this with him. The combination of rage and fear that I felt in that moment was like nothing I have ever experienced. I was so close with this guy for so long, so the anger that I had towards him felt brotherly. It wasn't stranger anger where it's cold and emotionless. It was the anger that you get when you're fist fighting your sibling and you're both crying about it. Because you're not embarrassed to show emotions at home. You're not gonna start crying as you're having a scrap with some dude over a parking spot. I was so mad at him for acting the way that he did the day before, and now for showing up to my house high. There's something so disrespectful to me about speaking to my mother while you're stoned. Like, bro, talking to my mom, showing up to my house and talking to my mom while you're tripping crosses the line for me in every single way. And I swear to you, I would have fought him in that exact moment if the image of that demon wasn't so fresh in my mind. And it was all I could see when I looked at him. It had his eyes. So as I'm looking at his eyes, all I'm seeing is this white, pale-faced, pasty, little arm, little leg, chicken skin demon. I'm not looking at my friend. My friend is gone. So I made him go down the stairs with me and out the front door, away from my family. And as we're walking by my family, I get the side eye from my mom and dad, like, "Hey, I don't know what's going on with this, why this kid showed up to the house and is like trying to talk to you, but we're trying to enjoy breakfast and we weren't expecting company." I was picking up the message that they were putting down. I agreed with them. I didn't want him here. So I take this kid outside and I'm trying to express to him how crazy disrespectful it is to do this around my family, to show up to our residence high as a kite the morning after you did something like that to me, and stand in front of me like you're giggling. And as I'm losing it emotionally towards this kid, trying to express to him everything that is wrong about this situation, he is subtly mocking me. He's copying my facial expressions as if he's a bully in school, trying to make me feel insecure for being emotional about it. And he just won't stop, so it gets to the point where I straight up tell my friend, "You are not welcome at my house uninvited anymore." I told him, "Bro, do not show up here. Do not speak to my family when you're off acid." I tried to express to my longtime friend that his behavior was deeply hurtful, but he was not hearing me. He was clearly holding in laughter, and the only response he had for me was, "So you're telling me that I'm gonna have to figure this out myself, I see," before letting out a chuckle like he's a Batman villain. So I decided to say, "Yeah, bro, figure it out without me," in a dismissive way as I was getting ready to turn around and go back inside. But as I'm replying to him, his expression changed to that same underbite smile that he was doing the day before. And he leaned into me into a horrible, unnatural hunch before almost hissing at me, "I already did." He said it with this level of venom and hate in his voice that I knew in that moment I didn't have to feel guilty about this. This guy is not my friend. He's talking to me like he hates me. He was stuck in his own drug-induced world, and I am convinced that he hated me. And for some reason, I was the focus of his hate today, but I was not going to be the focus of his hate tomorrow, because this was the last time I was ever going to see this kid by choice. Our friendship was over in that exact moment. In fact, our friendship was over the day before. This was just the cherry on top that made me not feel bad about it at all. The guilt that I had been feeling for abandoning him in that situation spontaneously combusted into nothing. I had no warm, loving feelings towards Marty after that. In my book, he was a danger to my well-being, a disrespectful person to my family and our boundaries, and the friend that I had grown up with that I knew very well was gone. And as much as he was scaring me in that moment, just the uneasiness I felt with him in front of me, hissing at me, clearly hatefully, I wasn't that scared of him because I knew he wasn't going to turn into a demon because I was sober now. I was free from his dosing. And I'm gonna make this very clear, I was not scared of Marty physically. So I got confrontational. I felt disrespected in that moment. The kid drugged me the day before. So I replied, and pardon my French by the way, get the fuck away from me and my family. First time cussing on the channel. I wanted to hit this kid. He continued to mock me even after I told him to get out of there. Everything in me wanted to slap the lips off this kid, but I could tell that he was trying to get a rise out of me. And I wasn't gonna give it to him. He didn't deserve that. And this man replied to my order to get away from me and my family by meowing as he started walking away backwards in this like weird rolling his shoulder meowing at me. It was as if he was subtly telling me that I wasn't gonna do anything about it. The meowing was so annoying and condescending and immature, but the weirdest part was that he was backpedaling away from me. And he was looking at me the whole time, rolling each shoulder, just repeating these meows until he got to the corner. And once he got to the corner, he went up on his heels and pivoted to his left. And his facial expression changed completely. He was being very mocking, very venomous, very annoying, purposely annoying, but his face went flat and he started walking off in some random direction with a purpose. It was as if he had completed this mission and was on a mission to go somewhere else. In a split second, he was absolutely uninterested in our altercation that he was very invested in moments before, and he was just ready to go somewhere else. And his side profile, obviously I couldn't see him from the front anymore, but he clearly wasn't making any mocking faces, any funny smirks. He was purely frowning, back to his horrible, dreadful tears and frowns. But in that moment, I was so relieved he left. I just wanted that kid away from me. So I go back inside and I told my parents everything. I told them every single detail about what I had been going through. I even told them about what I did the day prior and how much I regretted it and how I desperately just wanted to get my life together. I came clean to them fully. And I also warned them to not open the door to him and not interact with him anything past a hello in public. I told them everything that I had learned about him the day before, and obviously they were very sad and concerned for him, but they understood where I was coming from because I was telling them for their safety. And of course, my parents urged me to get together with some of our other friends to see if we could rally and get him some help. And as mad as I was with him, I did think that was the right thing to do. Not at that very moment because I felt like I needed space to recover and regroup from what happened the day before, but I did plan on getting the guys together and getting him to rehab. And you know, life goes on. A few days passed and I started to feel normal again. That lasting hangover from the trip faded, and so did the embarrassment from the entire situation. I started to feel normal again. And I had made the choice to myself. I had committed to myself that I was going to be better, and now I had goals to chase and disciplines to be committed to. And in all honesty, that horrible experience knocked some sense into me because I saw how bad things could get. If I were to compare it to something, I would compare it to that one TV show called like Beyond Scared Straight, where they take juvenile delinquents to real prisons so the kids could see how bad things can really get, and it scares the kids into becoming good people. I was so shook by that experience that I felt on the other end of it that I was starting a completely new life. I really felt like I knew who I was and who I wanted to be from there on out. And I started to feel much more comfortable in my own skin, especially when I started chasing goals and adding discipline to my life. A week had passed and I had already secured a new job. It wasn't anything crazy, but it was something to do with my time. I was a bar back at a bar in the city, and it just so happened that a good friend of mine, Jack, worked nearby. Jack was one of my friends that I had called earlier in the story, and he told me that he would be free like the weekend after next. But after I told him that I worked so close to his job, he told me, dude, I'll pop over after work so we could catch up for a little bit. And I was so excited to see him because I was no longer embarrassed about my situation. I had a job. I was back on my feet. We had so much to catch up about. And the first 30 minutes were just me and him catching up about what happened the past few years, but then Jack took a sip of his drink, and after he took his swig, he put it down and looked at me and he goes, "Have you talked to Marty recently?" And I look at him funny and I go, "Yeah, dude, have you?" And Jack looks at me and he goes, "Why are you looking at me like that?" And I reply to him, "Why are you asking about Marty like that?" And Jack goes, he's doing it to you too, isn't he? And I go, if you mean dosing me with powerful tabs of acid that he made himself and then crying at me in public for 3 hours and then bringing me to his drug den, then yeah, he's doing it to me, yes. And Jack looks at me wide-eyed and he goes, oh, no, he just keeps showing up to my house. Are you okay? And I look at him like, bro, I'm fine. It was a couple weeks ago. I'm hyping it up, but yeah, I'm fine, yes. But then I follow up and I'm like, why does he keep coming to your house? And Jack is like, dude, I don't even know. He's just been texting and calling me constantly to look at the murals that he's been working on. Like whatever that means. And then when I tell him I'm busy and I like can't show up, he shows up to my house and keeps asking me to come in. And when I would tell him that I didn't want company at that exact moment, I was decompressing and relaxing from work, like you gotta give me some notice, he would say things like, at least lend me some money, or at least give me a phone charger, or at least lend me your car for the day. And then when I would say no, obviously, he would say things like, you aren't who you used to be, I'll figure this out on my own. And then he would storm off, but right when he would get to the corner, right out of eyesight, he would start texting me again apologizing, only to show up the next day, ask for the same things, yell at me again, and then apologize again. So I reply to Jack pretty sarcastically after that kind of crazy thing that he just told me, and I go, well, he told me that he had already figured it out, so I think we're good. We tried our best to laugh about it, but honestly, it was not very funny. Obviously, me and Jack were happy to see each other and reconnect, but one of our boys was going through it, and that's hard to see happen. You try to joke about it, but at the end of the day, we were both feeling the weight of watching our friend crumble. And neither of us had heard from Marty since the day he left my house. He hadn't been to Jack's house since, but we made it a weekly routine to get together at my job after Jack got off work, and we'd chat a little bit, but we would always, at the end, talk about, hey, have you heard anything new about Marty? So we got together every single week, and then by about my 3rd week on the job, I'd figured out all of the ins and outs of the computer systems. I'd met all the regulars. The bartender could head out early if he wanted to. I could close up the bar for him. I was in control of my workspace. Like if the bartender wanted to get out of there, if there's no more tips left for him, I'd be able to close up the bar. I'd close out some tabs for some regulars. I'd clean up for him. Like it was no issue if he wanted to leave early. Like it didn't bother me to grab a drink for some random regular that was just sitting alone at the bar while I'm catching up with Jack, who came late. Because Jack would just show up after work and I would stand on my side of the bar, serving the people, the lingerers that would stay until the moment we closed, but they weren't really high maintenance, so me and Jack got to talk and I just run over, put a beer in front of him, a rum and coke in front of him. It was all good. And every week, me and Jack would talk sports, talk work, talk family, but at the end of the conversation, right before we were about to head home, we'd always check to see if the other one had heard from Marty. And up until that point, about 3 weeks later, it had been complete radio silence. That night that I was there with Jack, as we're talking about it again, there was only one regular left at the bar and he was just lingering on his stool. And this was a super common regular. He would just sit there, drink Coors Banquet beers, and he would go outside with every single person that was smoking a cigarette and bum one. He would come to the bar every day and he would talk to nobody other than cigarette asking, so he was a very low maintenance regular. This guy kept so much to himself that Jack and I didn't mind that he was there, and he was kind of out of it. Like the dude drank a lot, so we were willing to talk about whatever we wanted. I just made it a point to bring him another Coors Banquet beer and a nice glass of ice and a lemon wedge because that's how he seemed to enjoy it. I just stayed ahead of it to keep the guy happy, and I focused on my conversation with Jack. And this regular must have been 15 Coors Banquets deep by that time of the night, so me and Jack were talking about everything as if this dude wasn't there, because there's no way he was comprehending any word we said. So we finally bring up Marty, and this time, Jack has some new information for me, and he tells me that he had talked to our friend Nate, and Nate said that Marty was doing the same things to him, and he had even started breaking into his house to steal things. This was sweet, juicy gossip, and I wanted to know every single detail that Jack had gotten from Nate. But the regular at the end of the bar goes, I asked for a drink in like a weird slurry voice. So I asked Jack to hold that thought. I grabbed 2 Coors Banquets, placed it in front of him to keep him occupied before heading back to Jack. And then Jack continues by saying, apparently Nate talked to Marty's dad, and it turns out Marty's been on some wild stuff. I guess he maxed out all of his dad's credit cards and tried to take out a mortgage in his name, but he got denied because he didn't have a down payment. I had so many questions about what he possibly could have bought on these credit cards to max them out. And why in the world would he try to get a mortgage? Like, where is he now? But the regular in the corner called out. I thought he was occupied. He goes, I needed a check. So I roll my eyes, so pissed that I have to leave this conversation. I stroll over to the computer to close out this guy's tab, and I place his bill next to his free unopened beers that I didn't charge him for. I give him a little smile like, hey, don't bother me again. I go back to Jack, and he starts to tell me nobody knows where Marty's been since his dad found out what he was doing and confronted him about it. Meow. Jack and I look at each other like, bro, did you hear that? Meow. Someone just meowed twice. Jack thought it was funny, and so did the regular at the end of the bar, with the jet black goatee, bald head, top hat, and sunglasses inside. The guy looking like he's doing Heisenberg cosplay from Breaking Bad, laughing at the panic on my face. I didn't mention to Jack about Marty meowing at me before he left, so he thought it was funny. And this weird-ass regular has no idea what's going on in either of our lives. And I'm looking around the bar in an absolute panic trying to find the source of the sound when the regular meows for the third time. But this time he meowed while I was looking at him, as if he was rubbing it in my face. It was Marty, and he's wearing a disguise. He grew a long goatee, clearly dyed it black, shaved his head bald, put on a top hat, glasses, and a black bomber jacket, and this man was completely unrecognizable. Marty's blonde and he always shaved his face. We couldn't see his mouth, his eyes, or his hair, so we couldn't tell it was him. I look back at Jack to see if he's noticed who this is yet, and I saw the exact moment of realization in his eyes. Marty had been sitting in the same room with us for hours, just listening to us talk. He had been coming to my job for weeks. I had been serving him, cleaning up after him, leaving at the same time as him. I had been in this bar alone with him on multiple occasions over the past 3 weeks, and I had no idea it was him. He was unrecognizable like this. That was the scariest part. It was not that he overheard us gossiping about him. That's a little scary too. It was the fact that he was a complete chameleon. Those slight changes to his appearance, doing like a dark goatee, sunglasses, and a hat and a different attire, fooled his friends of 10 plus years. Neither me or Jack had any idea that was him until he purposely blew his cover. And before either of us had the chance to say anything to him, he broke the silence by saying, "Come look at my mural, guys," while standing up and walking towards the exit with a purpose, just like he did when he left my house, like he was on a completely different mission. We had to follow him. Obviously, Jack and I weren't about to go on to a nighttime stroll with Marty, especially while he's dressed like that. But Marty wasn't waiting for us. He was walking out of this bar with a miserable purpose, just like when he left my house last time. Me and Jack watched him walk out of the front door, and Jack immediately looks at me and told me that he wanted to follow him. When I tell you that I 100% would not have followed him if I was alone, I mean it. But this was a little bit different because Jack had a car. So I told Jack I'm willing to drive after him if we're safe in a vehicle so we could drive away if anything gets sketchy. And Jack looks at me with the most smug look on his face and he goes, "You thought I was gonna walk with Heisenberg towards his mural?" I felt stupid for a split second, but we didn't have any time to stew in it. I quickly turned off all of the lights in the bar and locked all the doors that I was responsible for and went into the parking lot. Marty had a head start on us, so we were expecting to have to circle the surrounding area to try to track him down. But please tell me why this man is standing in the middle of the street like he's a supervillain waiting for us. And mind you, we are not in a suburb, we are in downtown Chicago in the Loop on Wabash. The CTA red and brown line are overhead and there's jewelry stores on either side of us. And that part of the Loop reminds me of Sin City for some reason. It feels like it's plucked straight out of a comic book. So, Jewelers Row on either side of us, train tracks overhead, and our deranged friend standing in the street just staring at us waiting for us, wobbling side to side while cosplaying a drug dealer when he's actually a drug taker, while wearing this odd top hat like a 19th century gangster. And this man had the audacity to do a little shimmy dance when he saw that we decided to follow him, before pivoting and scurrying over to the curb and picking up a divvy bike off the floor. It was one of those stolen divvy bikes that you could find in every corner of the city, but he hopped on it and proceeded to drive towards the river north. If you aren't familiar with downtown Chicago and the Loop is basically where all the public transportation trains funnel into the city and they basically like turn around and head back out of the city. So it's called a loop. And in the loop, the trains go overhead. They're like above the street. And the streets that are under these elevated train tracks are usually a little less popular for foot traffic. They're probably empty for a lot of reasons, but for me, it just seems as if people could pretty easily rob you and then just run up the stairs and hop on a train and never be caught. That's my common sense reason, but it doesn't change the fact that that area is much more isolated than other parts of the city. So we're slowly driving behind Marty as he's just swerving back and forth on his stolen divvy bike. And from the look of it, as he's swerving back and forth, he's singing and shimmying. He was riding that divvy bike painfully slow, clearly didn't have a purpose of where he was going right now. He was just enjoying that we were following him. But me and Jack were locked in. We wanted to see where this kid was taking us. He was so in his own world, watching him was almost like must-see TV. Like, this was a very good friend of ours for a long time, and we just found out that he was lurking around us in a costume for weeks after going into hiding after getting caught for faking his way to a mortgage. You know when you see something so bizarre that you just can't help but to watch to see what happens next? That's what this felt like. This kid was acting like he was in his own movie scene, parading down Wabash. The level of shamelessness and confidence that he was exuding was actually intimidating. We followed him for blocks after blocks until we were closing in on Wabash and Wacker. You see, Wabash runs north and south, but Wacker runs east to west, and it actually runs alongside the Chicago River, and you have access to the Chicago River Walk from there. If you aren't aware what the Chicago River Walk is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a walkway that goes along the river, but it's filled with restaurants and storefronts and bars and heaps of nice art. It's like a nice tourist attraction. But the Riverwalk closes pretty early, and there's usually security patrolling down there. Like, people aren't allowed down there at night. So if Marty expected us to follow him down into the Riverwalk, that was going to be the end of our journey. He didn't do that initially though, but what he did do was, as we were closing in on the entrance to the Riverwalk, he stood up on his divvy bike and started pedaling aggressively towards the stairs that took you down to the Riverwalk. He was picking up speed as if he was going to attempt a BMX level stunt on this divvy bike. And Jack and I start to tense up thinking that our friend is about to send himself down these flights of stairs, gonna severely hurt himself. But right as he was approaching the stairs and we think this kid is about to take flight, he hops off the back and allows this divvy bike to ghost ride down these flights of stairs. And after he hopped off the divvy bike, he landed on his feet, jumped, turned around, and opened his arms out wide as if signaling to us like, ta-da, as if we should be impressed by him recklessly sending a bike down a flight of stairs. But his show wasn't over. He immediately bent his knees, held his arms up like he was a little T-Rex, went on his tippy toes, and started high-stepping down the stairs backwards. And anybody that's been to the Chicago Riverwalk knows that there's a bunch of art and murals down there lining the concrete walls. And everybody that knows the corner of Wacker and Wabash knows that that corner is incredibly busy no matter what time of night it is. And stopping to get out wasn't much of an option here. Like, we couldn't just stop and follow him in that exact moment. Like, I'm thinking, like, are we gonna throw our hazards on and hop out of the car? Like, what are we gonna do here? I was expecting and almost hoping that this was gonna be the end of the journey and we weren't gonna have to follow him down there. But Jack had other plans. There's a hotel right across the street from the entrance to the Riverwalk that allows for drop-offs in front. You could throw on your hazards and you probably have about 10 to 15 minutes before you might get in trouble. You see, Jack was not as cautious of Marty as I was. Even though I told him every detail, I left out the meow thing, so I clearly left out some disturbing details. But he didn't live my situation like I did, so he wasn't nearly as scared of him as I was, or as mad at him as I was. He saw Marty as a friend that desperately needed our help, which he kinda was, but I saw him as a demon. Sorry to tell ya, he was a demon to me. But Jack whipped into this drop-off lane, turned on his hazards, and looked at me. He gave me this look that told me that he would never forgive me if I didn't go down there with him. If I made him go down there alone, our friendship might be over. I just sat there, shook my head with frustration, and unbuckled my seatbelt. I wasn't going to try to be stealthy at all. I was planning on being loud, not trying to be stealthy, maybe making a commotion on the Riverwalk so one of the security guards can break up our party and kick us out and tell us we can't be here. And also, to be fair, the only other reason I went down there was because Jack is always strapped. I knew he had his pew-pew, and I also knew that he wasn't willing to get his car towed. Because if you get your car towed in downtown Chicago, I don't know if you know this is a horror story in itself, but if you get towed in the loop, they take it to lower Wacker, to this horrible pound 2 stories under the surface of the city. Like, you do not want to end up in sub-lower Wacker at night. Lower Wacker is sketchy enough. Sub-lower Wacker is literally like where the mole people live. Like, there's a colony of people that live down there. This is completely real, by the way. I don't know if I've explained this well enough. So there's underground streets in downtown Chicago, the most prominent one being Lower Wacker. Lower Wacker is known for homeless encampments, drug deals, drag races. It's actually where The Dark Knight filmed a lot of their sketchy tunnel scenes. It's definitely not a place that you want to get lost in. Oh, and I didn't mention that phones do not work down there, so you have no direction through your phone. There's no way to get out of there, and it's a legit maze. Like, you have to guess, and every once in a while, maybe you take the right turn, you get back to the surface. But it is an issue if you don't know how to navigate down there. You will be driving or walking in circles down there if you don't know where you're going. So that's Lower Wacker. But there's also sub-lower Wacker, or better known as lower Wacker, which you can only get to from original Lower Wacker, and that place down there feels like a legitimate horror movie. You go down there and you think like, something really bad is about to happen, and tons of horrible things have already happened. And it's also rumored that sub-lower Wacker is the only access point to the freight tunnels that they used to use like hundreds of years ago in Chicago that are even further 40 feet under sub-lower Wacker. And it's also rumored that there's a legitimate colony of people that inhabit this freight train tunnel system under there, like a real civilization of people under a major metropolitan city, and these people never come to the surface. But anyway, that's where the car pound for downtown Chicago is located, in lower Wacker. And I know that Jack knows this, so I know that he's not going to risk leaving the car here for too long. So we hop out, hustle across the street to the stairs of the Riverwalk. We look down only to find Marty still slowly T-Rex arms high-stepping down this stairwell. Everything in my body wanted to turn around and go back to the car in that moment. It felt like it was a trap to me, but Jack wanted answers, and if I'm being honest, I wanted them too. It went against every instinct, but I wanted to know what this kid was doing. So we hustled down the stairs to try to catch up to Marty, who's now at the bottom, and now he's shuffling over to the right and presenting us something that's on this wall. And he's acting like a weird mime, gesturing towards this large mural that's on this concrete wall. And at first I was confused as to what I was looking at, because it was clearly a very large mural, like 25 feet long, 30 feet tall, and this massive mural was filled with bright colors and large brush strokes. I couldn't tell what it really was because there was a large, darker mural that was about 10 feet high and 10 feet wide painted over it in the middle of this mural. And I couldn't tell what I was looking at. I couldn't see the details of these murals, these paintings, until Marty flicked on one of those portable construction worker lights, and he aimed it at the wall, using the light to reveal what we were looking at. And before I really took in what was on the wall, I noticed that in front of this dark portion of this mural, there was tons of painting supplies in front of it, as if a real artist, a real painter, was still working on it. And we're just standing there confused as to why Marty brought us to look at this. Like, the mural that was behind it, you couldn't really see all of it, but it was professional. And this mural that's in front of us is clearly professional work with like how highly detailed it is. And Marty's a coder, so we didn't understand why he's showing off somebody else's work to us. Like, whoever painted this large, darker blotch on this mural was clearly a professional street artist that covers other people's work in a very unique way. Like, it was almost as if he was trying to take this larger piece of art, put this darker piece of art in it to make it look like it was a hyper-realistic tunnel to a different place. And this piece of street art that I'm looking at was so hyper-realistic that if it was painted at the end of a tunnel, I would run face first into it like I was Wile E. Coyote from Roadrunner. It literally looked like a portal to a different place. It didn't look like a concrete wall or a painting over another mural. It looked like a legitimate, hyper-realistic, doorway to somewhere else. It was a really cool piece of work. Like if I was at an art museum, I'd be like, that's pretty sweet, but it didn't change anything about our situation at the moment. There was no reason we should be down in the Riverwalk looking at this piece of art when we're not even supposed to be down there. We needed to get our friend some help. He was clearly going through it, so I looked towards Jack, trying to see if he's gonna say something to Marty. But Jack is standing there, frozen in absolute fear. He has no color in his face, and he's looking at the mural and Marty like he's seeing a ghost. And Marty's standing there, laughing from his gut, almost like he's growling, as if he realized that Jack was in on some inside joke with him. And Jack says to me, without taking his eyes off the mural, "Bro, don't you see what that is?" And I realized that that dark blotch on that mural was like a portal to the park that we hung out as kids. Like it was an exact replica of a spot that we used to sit and hang out at as kids. And the painting was painted from the perspective of as if you were somebody sitting there, that you would only know about this spot if you were one of our friends. And the art was so hyper realistic that you would need to be an inch away from the wall to even see the paint strokes. But this spot was so specific, so Marty must have painted it. This was Marty's mural, and this was beautiful. But that was the scariest part though. How on earth is he capable of painting this? Where did he learn how to do this? How did he get this good at painting this fast? This capability is absolutely unnatural. So I look back at Jack and he starts barking at me. He's freaking out. He's like, what is this kid? Like some type of savant? Or is this some messed up joke that he's trying to pull? And in that same moment, from behind us, we heard a security guard shout like, "Yo, Riverwalk's closed. You guys got to get out of here." Marty immediately flicks off his light and starts running back up the stairs. And this kid is doing a Naruto run up the stairs, bent over at his hips with his arms stretched out behind him. Like every movement that he made that night was so intentionally bizarre. The way he was riding the bike, the way he was presenting things to us, the way he high-stepped down the stairs. Now he's Naruto running back up the stairs. It was so weird. We're not trying to get a ticket from this security guard. We don't know if this is like an off-duty cop. We don't know what the situation is. So we have to follow him the same way that he ran. We have to continue to follow this guy to whatever his next destination is. So once we get up the stairs, we just continue to follow him until he makes it to the top of a different stairwell. We couldn't see where that stairwell led to. He just stood at the top stair. It almost looked like one of those stairwells that leads to the subway, but I knew that there was no subway down here. So I'm just trying to figure out like why he ran to this one. What could this possibly lead to? When Marty stands with his arms wide open as if he's just trying to express this feeling of joy. So we're in a standoff and Jack is the first person to speak, trying to get through to Marty. He just goes, "Marty, that mural is amazing. I don't know what's been going on with you, but what you're doing, like that painting was beautiful, man. Like let us get you some help." "Yeah, isn't it?" Marty cut him off through his teeth, as if he was absolutely furious. His voice didn't match his accomplished posture. That he seemed as if he was joyful and accomplished, but the way he responded to Jack was mean and venomous, the same way he was talking to me at my house. This completely stopped Jack from talking anymore. I could tell that Jack was gonna try to continue to convince Marty to come with us and get some help. I don't know what Jack was thinking after he saw that mural. Maybe he was a little optimistic. Maybe he just thought, oh, Marty needs some help. He's some type of freakish savant of painting. But he was stuck in some regular job and lost his mind, fled into drugs, and all Jack wanted to do was help his friend follow his passion for painting without falling deeper into his addiction. That might have been Jack's conclusion. That was not the conclusion that I came to. I didn't even think Marty painted that. I thought that whatever that white pasty thing that I saw him turn into on that zoo trip was the one that was actually painting this. Because you don't develop skills like that overnight. Life doesn't work like that. Nobody's granted unbelievable abilities randomly in their 20s. People have God-gifted talent. I'm not denying that, but it still needs to be developed. And whatever this talent was, it didn't seem God-given. It felt sinister to me. And it felt like this whole situation was the trap that I thought it was going to be. People do not develop skills like that overnight, so he must have not done that alone. And I know for sure it wasn't an angel that helped him. So we're standing there in this odd face-off with our longtime friend. And in the moment, I'm going over all of the possibilities of what could possibly happen next. Is he gonna run away from us? Is he gonna try to attack us? Is Jack gonna continue to invite him back to the car with us to go get some help? I sure hope not. I don't want that kid sitting behind me in the back of the car where you could grab the seatbelt and start strangling me from behind. There seemed to be no good outcome from this situation. I was upset that I was even there. And I was still mad at Marty for what he did to me. Give me that heavy dose without telling me, trying to drag me into his BS. Like, if I didn't spit that thing out, if I didn't see the red flags ahead of time and get that substance out of my mouth, it could have changed me forever. And I really hated the fact that he kept coming to my job in a disguise. It felt kind of stalkerish. It felt like he was hyper fixated on me and was looking for another opportunity to try and drug me. And to be honest, who knows what his intentions were behind his erratic actions? All I knew was that I felt betrayed by my friend and I was deeply disappointed in him. The worst part of the whole thing was that he was clearly so lost to his addiction that he didn't care. He drugged me, he manipulated Jack, he stole from Nate, and financially wrecked his own dad. The kid was imploding and he was trying to take everybody down with him. Those were the conclusions that I came to. I thought my friend is no longer a good guy, so I snapped on it. I felt like in that moment he needed a reality check, so I started going in on him. I was like, bro, what is wrong with you, dude? Treating your father that way? Disrespecting my family like that? Trying to steal from your friends? You're trying to drug them now? What kind of man are you? No one thinks what you're doing is cool. You're throwing your life away. It's absolutely pathetic. Get your shit together, Marty, and grow up. And Marty's still standing there at the edge of these stairs, this stairwell that seems to lead to this odd black abyss. He gave me this really snarky look that indicated to me that what I said kind of chipped his ego. And that ego was fueling this odd bravado that he had. I must have gotten through to him a little, but it wasn't nearly enough. And he replied to me, like I said, so snarky. He goes, "You think I gave you that tab to make you like me? You can never be like me, dimwit. I gave you that tab to be one of my little helpers. I don't need you. I already have you." I was so done with him after he said that. So I said something that was meant to hurt him. It was a nasty and vile line, but in that moment, I felt like he deserved it. I clapped back. Bro, if I'm a dimwit, you're a dipshit. The only thing you have is a drug addiction, you junkie, and you're no better than the rats that you sleep next to. And he obnoxiously kind of like pretended that he was shot in the heart by what I said to tell me that he didn't care about my opinion about him, really trying to show me that what I said to him had no effect, and he was mocking me for even trying to get through to him. But he didn't just fake getting shot. He started tipping backwards, slowly over the stairwell, and we thought he'll regain his balance. He's still just doing this little bit. But he just tipped over all the way, and he didn't stop until he disappeared into the blackness of the stairwell. Dude basically did a trust fall into the abyss, and naturally we run up to check on him to make sure he didn't crack his head at the bottom of this concrete stairwell. And as I'm running up to check on him, I see the sign that indicates what these stairs are for, and this thing says sub-lower whacker entrance only. And I knew right then that this stairwell was probably disgusting. I already mentioned Lower Whacker's reputation, so I know that this stairwell is probably festering with muck and probably stinks of piss. I was so annoyed because the way that he fell down, he definitely cut himself, at least a scraped elbow, more than likely a cracked head, and if he opened a cut on this stairwell, on this concrete, this was a guaranteed infection, and we would have to take him to the ER immediately. We get to the top of these stairs, expecting to look down and see Marty in a puddle of piss at the bottom, but they caught him. Marty was being cradled like he was a cheerleader that just finished a stunt by 4 clearly homeless men with crazy cracked out eyes at the bottom of this stairwell, as if they were waiting for him to fall, as if this was a planned action, that they were waiting for him to trust fall, for us to see him, and for him to mock us as these people are supporting him. Now Marty and these other 4 men are just looking up at us from the shadows of the bottom of this stairwell, while Jack and I stood in disbelief at the edge of the top stair. And the satisfaction on Marty's face was disgusting when he finally said to me, mind you, he said it in the most confrontational way now that he had 4 other dudes with him. This dude says, "Why don't you come down to the triangle so you can introduce the junkies to the rats?" And Jack grabbed the back of my tricep as if he was stopping me from going down there, as if I was about to head down this stairwell and meet the junkies and the rats. And I'm not sure why he felt the need to do that, because there was no way in hell I was going to follow those people down there. Marty and his crew swiftly entered through the metal revolving door that only let people down into Lower Whacker. Like I said, it was entrance only. And if I passed that revolving door, I would be locked in sub-Lower Whacker and have to find a different exit. There was no following our old friend this time to see what else he was getting into. He descended into the dark maze of the subterranean streets of downtown Chicago. But before me and Jack could talk about what we just witnessed, we realized in that moment we had to get back to the car that's double parked in front of that hotel that has the hazards on. Everything that we were witnessing was so overwhelming that we forgot where we parked it, and it was getting close to the time where it seems as if it might get towed. But we got there, and thank God it wasn't. We saw a ticket guy eyeing it from down the street, but we got so lucky it wasn't towed, because we would have had to go exactly to where Marty and his little gang just fled to get the car back. And just the thought of that gives me the willies. I pictured standing in front of the pound, looking into the dark, deep abyss of sub-Lower Whacker and watching Marty emerge from the darkness with a horde of loyal drug zombies ready to swarm us so he could like wiggle his shoulders and laugh at us from the distance and maybe meow when they finally kill us. So Jack and I hop in the car to make sure we don't get a ticket either, and we do our best to discuss with each other what we just witnessed, to try to understand everything that we saw. I wanted to know what he thought about it. I wanted to know what conclusions he came to, because I was still trying to come to conclusions myself. We went over every detail we remembered, and we tried to make sense of the whole situation. But the only conclusion that we could come to was something that we already knew. 1, Marty is an extremely intelligent guy, and 2, Marty was completely lost to his addiction, and 3, Marty needs help. I tried to tell Jack about really what I witnessed at the zoo with the demon and what I thought was kind of really going on, because I was kind of tripping out about it. That really traumatized me. I wasn't sure if my friend was possessed or not, but Jack brushed it off because he's like, dude, he dosed you. Like, we can't put any weight behind what you saw that day. And I tried to argue with him that, like, bro, that mural that he made, that hyper-realistic mural, that isn't natural. He shouldn't be able to do that. But he argued with me about that point, and he kind of made a little sense. The reality is that we haven't hung out a lot in the last 3 years. Almost not at all. And he might have started this painting journey 3 years ago, and he might have been a natural from the jump. And clearly he quit his job. He might have just spent this entire 3 years popping tabs and painting. I was expecting Jack to kind of give me a hard time about snapping on him and being so hostile towards him, but he didn't. I think he understood where I was coming from, and I think Jack would have been just as mad if Marty did the zoo thing to him. I never wanted to see Marty again, and I truly believed, even at that point, that he was a total lost cause. But I still had a great friendship with Jack. I cared about Jack. So I couldn't leave him in this situation by himself, leave all of this on his shoulders. And Jack wasn't ready to give up on Marty, so he convinced me to give it one more chance, but I wouldn't have to be as hands-on in the situation. We formulated a plan on the drive home, and we promised each other that we would start to implement it the very next day. The plan was to go to Marty's dad and find out everything that he knew. Then we were going to take Marty's dad with us to all of our close friends' houses, all the kids that we grew up with, and we were going to tell them exactly what was going on if they didn't already know. And then all of us were going to pile into cars, find Marty, and stage an intervention, and hopefully that would get through to him. And if he didn't listen, if we didn't get through to him, all of us were going to grab him and take him to involuntary rehab to make sure he got the help he needed. His dad had already did all the proper paperwork for the involuntary rehab, and he was actually a perfect candidate for it. They thought this is an appropriate situation to take somebody against their will to get them help. So we had the total green light to bring him in. We just had to find him. Involuntary rehab, the whole process of it is a little bit technical. Technically, Marty would still be able to fight it by law, like he could get a lawyer and he could get out of it, but at least we would get him into that situation. He would have to go defend himself in court, and if he was on drugs in court, then he definitely would still go to rehab. It just felt like the right thing to do for our friend. I was so mad, but with everybody else there, it took a little pressure off me. It didn't feel as personal. And it felt better than giving up on him completely, especially when we saw his dad and I saw the state he was in. I wanted to help the guy. Like, the first thing his dad said when he opened the door when we went to his house was, "What took you guys so long? I've been waiting for you to show up." And then we didn't even have to ask. He just started telling us what has transpired over the past year, and it was so much worse than we thought. According to his dad, it all started with some girl that he was seeing, and it was the girl's idea to trip with him as a little date night idea. And Marty had never done it before, but he liked the girl a little bit. He thought it would be a fun idea, and they took a little tab, and he hasn't been the same since. The girl called his dad through Marty's phone, freaking out, crying, saying he was freaking out and she was scared of him and she couldn't control him. She said she found him in the bathroom by himself, staring himself in the mirror from like 1 inch away, repeating, "I'm not real. This isn't real." And when she tried to snap him out of it, he turned his attention towards her and started saying, "You did this to me." And she was saying it, "I feel like he's going to get violent. He looks like he's going to be violent." She had to run away from him that night. She had to get away from this kid out of fear of his violent behavior. But she cared about him a little bit, so she checked on him the very next day, only for him to look at her in the face and give her that same 3-word answer, "I'm not real." And obviously the girl got a little freaked out because he was acting the same way the next day when the drugs totally should have worn off. So she tried to ghost him. She didn't really know him that well. They're more like friends with benefits that had been hanging out for like a month and a half. They weren't really a potential relationship blooming. So she felt like ghosting was a reasonable option. But that was until he started showing up at her house and her job while repeating to her, "You did this to me," while crying at her. And this girl had no choice but to move, change her number, and find a new job. Not to mention she had to swap out her leased car because he knew what she drove. She had to go and do all of that stuff just to get him off her tail. It had gotten so bad, it progressively got worse to the point where she said, "If he ever finds me again, I'm going to leave the state for good." And once Marty wasn't able to find this girl, he had nothing else to do. And apparently, he started wandering back home and spending a lot more time at his dad's house, which he rarely visited after he moved out. And his dad knew something was up with him from the jump, obviously because he had talked to that girl, but he started doing a better job of hiding it, and his manipulative tendencies started coming out. His dad said that he started catching Marty having full-blown conversations with himself in the mirror, like really intense emotional conversations with himself. But then once he knew he had company, once his dad entered the room or made a sound, he would go right back to normal and pretend he wasn't doing it. He explained away why he left his jobs. He had good reasons. His dad was obviously asking like, "Yo, what's going on with your life?" But he was in a state in which he was definitely something was off with him, but he was also really good at manipulating because he wasn't fully gone. But over time, it became more and more obvious. His manipulation got a little bit worse. He wasn't covering his tracks as well, and it was clear he was spending all of his time doing drugs. And he would show up to his dad's house so frequently, borrowing random items, and he started asking for money so often, which he hadn't done in the past, that his dad finally had to put his foot down. But when Marty's dad finally put his foot down and let him know, "This behavior isn't okay, I'm not giving you any more money," Marty got vicious with him. But Marty's dad didn't back down. He didn't give him any money. He cut him off completely, and he returned his car to the lease agency because it was technically in his dad's name. And he wasn't trying to punish him or be cruel. He didn't want his son driving under the influence, and it seemed as if he was always under the influence. And he even still let Marty into the house until he found out where Marty was going every night. His dad started following him. He started kind of stalking his own son just to get an idea of what Marty was up to. And most of the time, he was doing random, pointless errands that there was really no means to an end, or he would just sit in random areas of the city painting murals, hours and hours of painting murals. But he eventually started venturing down into Lower Wacker and spending days down there. And then he started to be constantly surrounded by homeless men that seemed to be running those pointless errands for him, and it was like he was their boss and they looked up to him. So when Marty would disappear into Lower Wacker and his dad didn't want to follow him, he would follow one of the little minions on whatever errand they were running, and it seemed as if they were scouting abandoned buildings to squat in. And over the course of a few months, they were going to many buildings. They had a bunch of different locations of whatever operation he was running, but it seemed as if there was one building that was their main headquarters. But what Marty's dad didn't know was that when he was watching the minions and following them, watching them break into abandoned houses, Marty was going back and breaking into his house. And Marty was going through all of his stored private information, finding all of his hidden credit cards. He was taking copies of his social, his birth certificate, and just about every other piece of information that you would need to steal somebody's identity. So when Marty's minions were out location scouting, he was systematically using all of his father's credit to purchase random equipment, and he was having all of this equipment shipped to their main property. His dad only found out because he ran out of credit card space to use, and Marty decided to order this like $40,000 3D printer out of his debit card, so his dad finally got an alert. But when his dad found out about all this fraud that was occurring, it was too late. He had already maxed out almost every credit card he owned. And he wanted to confront his son because he knew where he was staying, he knew where to find him, but he was too scared to. So the only thing the dad could do is wait for Marty's friends to show up to help. If he called the police on what was happening, his son would go to prison. He couldn't do that to his boy. And Marty knew that his dad wouldn't do that to him. But what he didn't know is that his dad would ask all of Marty's friends to pull up to this headquarters and pull him out and force him to go get some help. After hearing Marty's dad's whole story, I was completely blown away. I thought that kid did me dirty, but it wasn't even close to what he did to his own father. And when we were rounding up the guys, it was not hard to convince them. Once they heard Marty's dad's story, they all were just like, I'm in, let's go get this kid. We felt so bad for his dad, and the more of us that came together to help, the easier that this was gonna be. And personally, I didn't hate the idea of showing up to this place with 20 of the other guys. Like, there's nothing that Marty could do that would be disturbing enough to scare off all 20 of us. It was very likely that we were just gonna pull up, kick whatever door down, find him, grab him, toss him in a car, and we were gonna be done with it. And of course, drop him off at rehab because he clearly wasn't going to take an intervention seriously. So we gathered the men, we chose a date, we sent a scout to make sure that he was at that building at said time, and we all pulled up on him like we were the FBI raiding a home. And the house that he was staying at here was much larger than the one that he brought me to the day of the zoo, that like 3-flat trap house. And frankly, this one was much nicer. Like, I could tell why he chose this as his main residence. It was a 2-flat, just 2 stories, but it was massive. And I'm not gonna stand here and pretend that I was at the front line pumping up this crew of dudes like I was Braveheart, getting ready to kick down the door and fight off all of Marty's minions to get to him. I was very happy to take a back seat here and let some of the other dudes handle this. Considering I was dealing with him for weeks and I organized the intervention/kidnapping, I felt like my job was done. I was gonna let the other guys do the talking and the grabbing, and then once he was dropped off at rehab, my conscience would be clear. So we pull up to this place, and one of our big friends who played like offensive lineman in college just kicked the door into this house like it was like a playhouse, and he marched in calling into that house for Marty. And we all funneled in to start looking for him so he couldn't climb out a window to escape. But the line in the doorway started to jam as if the people that were in front, seeing what was inside, stopped moving forward, so there wasn't space for the people behind them to keep going. I could hear a commotion from inside, and I could feel people pushing each other to make more space. By the time I got in, once the entire crew had funneled into this random house, nobody was looking for Marty anymore. Instead, we were wandering this main floor of this house trying to take in the scene that we were observing. This place was a straight up art exhibit. Every single wall was covered in hyper-realistic paintings. It was just like the one back at the Riverwalk, but it was every single wall. And every portion of every wall was different. It was all specific locations, specific landscapes of places that we would hang out as kids. But it wasn't just the painting on the walls that was breathtaking. There were life-size sculptures standing in front of these different landscapes as if they were snapshots from core memories from our childhood. There was one that stuck out to me initially because I didn't recognize every single one, but one I remembered like it was yesterday. It was a backdrop of our friend's lake house yard. We'd spend some weekends at that lake house partying, and there was 2 sculptures in front of that perfect backdrop, squared up as if they were fighting. There were two sculptures, one of our friend Nate and one of our friend Quinn, and they were fighting each other. And everyone in this building remembered that fight. It was a long time coming, they always had a little beef with each other, and they fought for like 15 minutes at that lake house. Everyone remembered it, and this painting and sculpture perfectly embodied that moment. It was like looking into it was like a core memory coming to life. It was incredibly well done. There were about 8 different of these incredible scenes on the main floor. That specific one was the only one that I recognized, but it seemed like every scene on this floor, at least one person recognized it. They were like, I was there. I was there with him at this particular scene. And I want to make this incredibly clear. Nobody was impressed. No one was having fun. No one thought this was cool. You could hear a pin drop in that room as full-grown men are finding hyper-realistic sculptures of themselves as teenagers. And they're just trying to figure out what was happening. Nobody understood. I didn't understand what was happening. How was he capable of this? And I could tell everybody was getting very freaked out. But everybody got a little more freaked out when we heard talking from the next floor. Right above us, we could hear Marty talking to somebody up there. And luckily, this staircase was wide, so multiple people could walk up at once, because nobody wanted to enter the scene of the second floor first. I was in the second row of 3 people to get to the second floor, and once I was up there, I realized all of us were finding the same thing, a very similar scene to the main floor. The only difference with this floor is that about 50% of the walls were unfinished and unpainted, and Marty was in the far corner talking to 2 sculptures as if they were on set to some sitcom. And he was just sitting there delivering lines a couple times, acting as if the sculptures were responding, even doing impressions of the sculptures. Also, when he would mess up, he would stand up and go reset a camera that he was using to record himself in the sculptures. He was acting as if he was a director and an actor on the set of like a movie. But what he was really doing was reenacting core memories. And I only knew that because he was talking to a sculpture of me. And he was reenacting a hilarious conversation that we had on the concrete steps near Lake Michigan overlooking the lake and the skyline. And the mural behind my sculpture was exactly how I remembered that day. It looked identical. And I remembered the conversation because we had quoted that conversation. We had inside jokes about that day. We used it for years. It was a core memory that neither of us ever forgot. We laughed about it every time we talked about it. But now I'm watching my friend desperately try to relive it as if it happening wasn't enough for him. He had to be there again, and he had to feel the freedom of naivety and youth, and apparently he needed to capture it on film so it could never be forgotten. And in that moment, my heart broke for my dear friend. It was clear that the pressure of manhood was too much for him, and the transition from childhood to adulthood broke him. It was clear that the thought of mortality haunted him deeply, and he ran to drugs as an escape, and he was attempting to recreate moments that were lost in time. He painted the views that he took in when he was happy, and he sculpted his youthful friends so they could never leave him. Before his friends were plagued with the responsibilities of adulthood, he was desperately trying to find comfort through substance and use these scenes that he created to cope with the reality that we'll never get those times back. That's what he was trying to figure out. That's what he kept saying to me. He was trying to figure out how to go back. And all of us are just watching our friend recreating this scene over and over again, trying to get his own laugh rate for the camera, until his father walked up and put his hand on his shoulder, and Marty turned around with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Now with the black goatee that he grew out, shaved off, the top hat nowhere in sight, he looked like himself again. And he was staring at all of us, this group of his friends that created all of these memories with him. And we're all just looking at him with this deep concern. And at first he looked at us like we couldn't be the real ones, like the sculptures were the real ones. But he eventually started walking towards us, and the expressions on his face were more like himself. He looked more like himself than I'd seen him in weeks. And in that moment, he admitted to the group and to himself everything that we already knew. He started saying, almost whimpering, "Guys, I need help." And all of us knew in that moment that he was gonna come without a fight. He was gonna go to rehab. We all embraced him in a group hug, just showing him like, we're not gonna abandon you in this. And a couple guys walked him out of the building into a car and drove off with him. But the rest of us stuck around to admire this kid's work, and we started to reminisce on these scenes that he created. Like, some of us hadn't seen each other for over 5 years, so this was a trip down memory lane. Like, when is another time we're gonna get together like this? It ended up feeling very wholesome, and all of us started to feel a twinge of what Marty was feeling. It was the feeling that all of these memories on these walls are completely gone. We're a room full of men, and these stories that are on these walls and in these sculptures are just stories now, and they're gonna fade away when we fade away. And I think we were all grateful for Marty in that moment, that he created these core memories and brought them back to life for us. They were moments that we were never gonna get to live again, and they were right here for us. The exact scene, the characters in it, with all of the people that we created these memories with. And Nate had walked over to the camera that Marty was recording himself with and was going through all of the scenes, just flicking through them to watch the scenes that he had played out. And we were all laughing and enjoying his renditions of these core memories. Like, Marty's in there doing impressions of all of the guys that are here, and we're like, oh, he's better at this one than this one. Like, it was funny, it was good, it was wholesome. And a lot of the guys had tears welling up in their eyes because we didn't know how we were supposed to feel about this. We were conflicted about this whole thing. But none of us left there conflicted, because in that video, one of the sculptures groaned and wiggled, and Marty stood up and stuck a syringe in its arm to get it to stop. This wasn't an art gallery. This was a cemetery. Well, that story was a doozy. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was darker than most, but I appreciate you guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for liking. Thank you for subscribing. There's a very big announcement coming here soon. If this is your first time on my channel, coming from somewhere else, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope we lived up to the hype. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. And if you like this video, YouTube thinks you would also like this one, so go ahead and click it.